Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for coming. This is the last session of the day, so you all get the Endurance Award. My name is Kara Cruz-Lee, and I'm the Director of Product Management for the eBook program at EBSCO. And DRM-free eBooks is near and dear to my heart because we've spent the last year plus talking to publishers and libraries about this in an effort to bring a large-scale DRM-free ebook offering to market. And we learned that this is really an ongoing evolution. EBSCO is actually rather late to the party, all things considered, but there are still a lot of challenges with regard to DRM-free ebooks, from what technology is used, to what content is suitable, to what pricing is fair. So we thought we'd take the opportunity to put librarian and publisher perspectives on a panel together and think about kind of where we are in that evolution, why we are where we are now and where we're headed. So each of our panelists will offer their perspectives, and then we hope that you'll join in some discussion afterwards. So before I turn it over to the panelists, I just wanted to share a few things from the aggregator perspective. First, I'd like to level set on what it means for ebooks to be DRM protected on an aggregator or a publisher platform. So DRM protection actually includes a number of different controls on the content, so limits on the number of simultaneous users, limits on the number of pages a user can print, save, or copy, the requirement to be signed into the specific platform in order to initiate a full book download, and then special software or apps, usually Adobe DRM, that enforce a checkout period, expire the file after that checkout period, and limit the transfer to devices. So there's actually a lot of hoops that the users have to go through in order to download ebooks, and that's kind of why we've heard this such an outcry from libraries. Secondly, earlier this year we partnered with Library Journal on an end user survey and found some interesting things regarding DRM. 74% of users just believe there should be no restrictions at all on library ebooks. We thought that was interesting. More than a third of users have taken a principled stand and told us that they only use ebooks without restrictions. And we're hearing more and more from our librarian customers that they only buy ebooks without restrictions. So the presence or absence of DRM is having more and more of an impact on both usage and buying patterns. And then finally, I wanted to share some early data from EBSCO's program. So we released around 75,000 DRM-free ebooks in April. So we have about 2 months of data so far. And DRM-free at EBSCO is a version of the unlimited user model. So we sell single user, 3-user, and unlimited user perpetual licenses. And part of the hope with this initiative was to increase sales of the UU model, that by providing more utility for the title, we would generate additional revenue for each title. So this chart shows the last 2 months, year over year, and you can see that sales of the single user model increased just a little bit. Sales of the 3-user model actually declined, and for the publishers participating in DRM-free, sales of the UU model has jumped dramatically just in these last 2 months. And in addition to the increase in sales, DRM-free titles are getting 62% more usage than single-user titles, which after 2 months with minimal indication on the platform is kind of amazing to me. So these are good early signs for the publishers that are participating, and we'll continue to collect and share data as time goes on. So with that, I'll turn it over to Allison Bradley.
Hi, everyone. So I'm here to give you the librarian's perspective and talk a little bit about why we care. Why would we care about not having DRM on the ebooks? Speaking personally, it's because I don't like being yelled at. Our users' experiences with limited access ebooks available through collections that are locked down with DRM, it's not meeting the expectations they have for content that we provide. Any of the collections like Kara described earlier where you have to use specialized software, individual logins specific to a platform, or where books aren't allowing you to access and use the work in the way that you do for typical research has caused frustration for our faculty and our students. Faculty in particular have been trained over the last 20 to 25 years to expect electronic content from the library to be PDFs that download. When they look at our ebooks, they don't say, why doesn't this work like a print book? Why doesn't this look like a Kindle book? They say, why isn't this working like the journal articles that I can download? They have an expectation that electronic content will function in a certain way, and they don't really care about learning why it doesn't. Inconsistency is one of the major concerns that I have. Our users get very frustrated when, from one platform to the next, their experience is dramatically different, and the way they can use one book is dramatically different. Even within specific platforms, sometimes the first book they open, they can read it all, they can download it all, they can save all the chapters, and then the second book that they open, they can only get 20 pages at a time. That's something that I find very challenging to explain, and it's not very transparent on the user side. So it's a major pain point that we see. And finally, when I try and help our faculty understand how to navigate the different platforms from one to the other, or how to differentiate between a book that's going to function the way they expect and one that doesn't, my favorite piece of feedback I've ever gotten is just don't make me think like a librarian. They don't want to have to learn which platform does what. They want the ebooks to function the way they expect them to. Over time, I feel that the journal market has settled out very much for them to have a consistent expectation. We're never going to convince them to act like librarians. We're never going to convince them to think like publishers. We have an obligation as librarians to meet those needs. So what can we do about these problems? Just to give you a little bit of a history, about 5 to 10 years ago at UNC Charlotte, we had started rolling out the Net Library ebook collections to our campus. We got a lot of feedback, a lot of frustration from users about why the books weren't working the way that they expected. Around 2013 or 2014, Chuck Hamaker, who was our AUL for collection development at that time, had started writing and speaking about how we could continue to fulfill our traditional role as a library supporting research for campus today and into the future when the kinds of materials we were collecting were changing so rapidly. In particular, they were concerned. We had some concerns around how we could preserve scholarship into the future, as at that time the DDA models and short-term loans were really growing in popularity. So Chuck came up with 3 simple principles that he thought any library should ask of the publishers and the vendors that they worked with in order to continue sustaining that traditional role that a library has in providing access to research material both now and in the long term. The 3 principles were simple: that our users expected to have unlimited access to digital content. We needed to be able to provide perpetual access so that we could actually retain access to scholarship for researchers 100 years from now, and that DRM-free was the only way for these ebooks to actually meet the practices that our faculty and students engage with. We were invited at that time by the Mellon Foundation Scholarly Communications Program to propose a project to explore how these principles might work in practice, whether libraries felt that they were consistent, adoptable, and sufficient to address the needs that we saw, whether publishers thought that they would be something that could be considered, whether it would undermine their business models. And we received funding to convene a working group of publishers, librarians, and aggregators to discuss how those 3 principles might work on each side of the market, and also to commission an environmental scan to see how many of our current publishers' business models offered, either completely or in part, models of purchasing that accommodated these 3 principles, and also to see how in different research areas around ebooks, the 3 principles would affect all of those different parts of the market. So the environmental scan worked in multiple stages. Some of you may have been interviewed or responded to a survey that was conducted by October Ivins, trying to determine how these purchasing models were meeting the principles already. In the results of the survey, all 3 principles were supported in theory, with somewhat weaker support for the DRM-free, for concerns around piracy and other exploitation of content. But when I spoke with October earlier this week, she said to bear in mind that during the 2 years of the grant's work, the market began to change. And in the 2 years since the grant was completed, it's changed even more. So I think that you'll see that there's been more and more uptake of the 3 principles today. In addition to the publisher's survey and the interviews, we had research teams conducting literature reviews in various areas. The user experience group worked on investigating how DRM is studied and discussed when we are trying to determine whether or not users are satisfied with libraries' ebook collections. All of our reports, by the way, the environmental scan and all 4 research teams' literature reviews are available on the Charlotte Initiative's website, so I'm going to give as quick of an overview as I possibly can. In particular, we tried to investigate whether or not studies of user satisfaction with ebooks are differentiating between an ebook that has DRM, has restrictions, or is widely available. And what we found is that not only do many of our studies not differentiate between which collection we're talking about when we decide whether or not a certain type of user or a certain group of users is happy with the ebooks their library provides, our users often have absolutely no idea. In one of my very favorite studies that we found in the literature review, they asked the respondents who had already said that they are heavy users of the library's ebooks, that they use them frequently, they had strong opinions about how the ebooks functioned, which of 7 or 8 platforms was the one that they used most commonly or that they were the most comfortable with. EBSCO did actually get the largest share of any of the publishers. They got 17%, but that is dwarfed by the 55% that said that they either did not know or did not care or did not believe that they had used any of the collections. So it kind of goes back to my earlier point that our users are not interested in engaging with these issues at the level of the platform or the publisher, aside from, of course, when they have an identification with a publisher for the content. And so as the working group was convened over the 2 years of the term of the grant, our real primary purpose of having this project was to get all these different players into a single room and to talk through where the pain points were for all of us, to get into heated, lively debates over the different issues that came up. We found that there was a general consensus that the 3 principles are feasible on both sides, but that there are still risks and challenges and a lot of confusion throughout the market. Does it mean, if you adopt these 3 principles, that a small library can't choose to support a small program with single user collections? Would you somehow be violating this test that we've set for ourselves? If the publishers are willing to provide books on these terms, are the libraries going to be willing to pay a higher rate to cover the loss of business? The real risks and the challenges within the market are really difficult to find. As far as the cannibalization of print was one of the topics that came up the most, whether if our print sales would start going down if DRM-free books were made available to libraries and then they filtered out into the scholarly sharing market. Some of our publishers talked about their own experiences with open access monographs, and others referred to studies that have been done showing that open access monographs can be published alongside with print monographs without necessarily completely undermining the market for the print books. And so if we're able to consider that model, would a DRM-free book have the same risk that we might anticipate? And finally, just the major challenge in every area researched, whether it was DRM or licensing or course use, is what do we mean by these terms? What does perpetual actually mean? When is a textbook a textbook? All of this confusion leads to a lot of challenges when we have our conversations separately. So getting more players into the room together to share in these discussions is really the only potential solution. For DRM in particular, we found that some of our participants thought that just a time-stamped watermark would be okay, but would a digital invisible watermark that wasn't transparent to the user work the same way? Overall, we think that the market continues to change, and the only way that it's going to really progress is if we continue to work together towards providing our users what they need and expect.